Hello, this is Priscilla from Speakers Connect. Today, we're very happy to have David Lim with us. David is best known for leading the first landmarked Singapore Everest Expedition, but what you may not know is he's also a very seasoned negotiator. So thank you, David, for your time today.
Well, thank you, Priscilla, for having me, and hello everyone who's tuned in for this particular segment. And you're right in a sense that people may be wondering what's the connection between like leading Mount Everest expeditions, speaking about leadership matters, and one of my pet topics in that broad spectrum of leadership skills is really the skill of negotiating, and that's whether you're negotiating for valuable bottles of oxygen on Mount Everest, negotiating salaries of the Sherpa climbers who are on your team. And it bleeds into almost every single area of life, including the workplace. Like when say you want to negotiate your salary upwards. When you're negotiating with another business, whether you're on the buy side of things, procuring things, or whether you're on the sell side and you're marketing your services. And where I think a lot of people fall down on in this area is that they may have a good product and they may have a good position and they're very good at sales. But when the crunch comes, when actually comes securing the actual contract itself, that's when negotiations can play a huge part in whether you get the extra 1, 5, 10, 20% or even more without doing a single extra thing. And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't quite understand about negotiating. It's not about making like double of what you could, and sometimes you can. But I'm just saying it's just about having that slight edge. I'll give you an example. If let's say, for example, you are closing 100 different contracts a year, and you can get 2 to 3% more on each contract. Over a period of a year, how much more would it have added to your business's bottom line? So I always talk about the slight edge in negotiations, because that's what matters, the slight edge. So I believe there's some questions for me this morning, Priscilla, that might be interested.
Yes, I have a lot of questions for you.
All right, fire away and let's get cracking.
So the first question that I have for you is, before negotiation, what are the essential preparation we should have so that we have a higher chance of getting a better result?
Wow, that question alone could take a long time, but I understand we have certain constraints on this call here. But I think that preparation definitely has to include knowing what you're negotiating with and who you're negotiating with. So context is very important. So for example, you could have clear goals of what you want to achieve at the end of that meeting, that discussion. You want some movement to get to some finality in that deal. And that's usually what negotiation is about. Two people actually have a similar intention, but they are separated by a number of factors. They can be monetary or non-monetary factors. So the most important part of preparation, I think, is that number one, clear goals. So what you want to achieve. And those clear goals can include things like how much you're willing to let go of, what you're willing to concede, for example. And that's where we use that term that was popularized by the Harvard Business School program in negotiation, which is about BATNA. Talking about BATNA, B-A-T-N-A. The BATNA means best alternative to negotiated agreement. That means before we get into a negotiation, we have to be very clear about what we would be happy to accept as the closest outcome to the ideal outcome. Now, sometimes you do get the ideal outcome, but what's the next closest outcome? Your best alternative to negotiate agreement. Now, it could mean walking away as well, but you have to be very clear what your BATNA is. If you don't enter a negotiation without that, you're going to be confused and you're going to be frustrated at your outcome. The third thing, I think, is who you're meeting. I think it's really important to get it very clear. My own principle in negotiating is to try very, very hard not to negotiate with somebody who doesn't have the power to say yes or no. So I'll repeat that. Don't negotiate with somebody who doesn't have the power to say yes or no. So very often, we know who the decision maker is. For some reason, we can't get around that person who is the influencer, the person who say was our first point of contact. And sometimes worse, that person is mostly a messenger. You know, they say, how about this? You say, well, what about that? They go back to the person who makes the decision and they come back again. It wastes a lot of time on both sides. So the most important thing is try to get to the person who can say yes or no to the decision. And I think the fourth key thing about preparing is looking at the context. Understand where the relative positions of power are. Now, a lot of people go into negotiation thinking that they have no power. The other side has all the power. They can make all the decisions. They're the one that can name the price. They're the one that can decide. Well, maybe yes and maybe no. So I'm encourage a lot of people to look very closely at their own unique position to try and figure out who's got that relative position of power. And sometimes you'll be very surprised as to who's got that power. So look very closely. To what extent do you, say, for example, have expert power in a negotiation? So that's really a situation where you go into a particular negotiation thinking you have no power. You think the other side, maybe they're a big multinational, and maybe you're just a small business, and they call the shots, they name the price, they decide who to give it to, the contract to, and in many cases they may be right. That may be the case, but never forget why you're there. If they're interested in what you have to provide, it means that you have some degree of power. And that's preparing to understand who's got the relative power in that negotiation. And negotiation can be time negotiation, it can be positional negotiation, a number of various elements of negotiation. For example, if you're rushing for something, you urgently need to catch a flight somewhere, for example, right? Well, you probably have to pay the price that the plane wants. A lot of people trying to rush back from the different countries before borders closed recently wound up paying $13,000, $14,000, $15,000 for a first class ticket for a long distance flight because they couldn't get any other ticket. So in that situation, who had the power then? It was the airlines that had the relative power, but it's not necessarily the case. So always take a look at what power do you have. If you're a small business, but you are an expert in your field and a multinational comes and negotiates with you, well, they want to talk to you for an obvious reason. So obviously there's some perception of power there. So that's one thing that I think businesses should never forget when they're negotiating their service or products, is that you're talking for a very obvious reason. You have some degree of expertise, a unique product, a desirable thing that the other party wants. So once you have that in mind, then you prepare accordingly, understanding that sometimes they don't necessarily have all the power.
Sometimes we just think that we have less negotiating power than the others, but that may not be true.
Absolutely not. And you'd be surprised how people suddenly realize, hey, wait a minute, I've got something going on here. And of course, and the real key sign is that the fact that you're talking. The fact that two of you sitting down to discuss means that they want something. The second question is that what price do they want it for example. And that's a very common situation that arises.
Mm-hmm. But we also know that in negotiation, one thing may not be affordable is actually to make some concessions. So would you mind let us know a little bit more about the secrets of asking and also giving concession more effectively?
Well, here's the thing, isn't it, right? Typical scenario of concession is somebody wants to sell something at a certain price and they wants to buy something at a lower price. And then basically they ask, oh, can we have it for less? Can we have it for 20% less? Now, one of the best times to actually ask for concession is when you get asked for one. If let's say I want $100,000 for this particular product, and the other side says, it looks pretty good. Okay, let's do the deal. And then basically some people are very happy doing that. There was no real negotiation there. But very often they'll say, well, will you do it for less? Well, you see, this is the beauty of negotiations. That's why I mentioned earlier, without adding anything extra to the product, feature, some extra research and development, doing additional, sometimes without doing anything extra, you can make a huge difference by negotiating effectively. So the best time to actually ask for a negotiation sometimes is when you get asked for one. Because that tells the other party is that you're asking me to remove some price, some cost to you by lowering my price, for example. And I want you to understand that there has to be some exchange of value. That means if you want me to lower the price on something, I'm going to take out something. How many components do you want me to remove, for example? Yeah. And somebody says, oh, no, I don't want you to remove anything. I want you to deliver me that thing. Or let's say you're selling a car, for example. So a classic way that people negotiate, like say when you're buying a car in a showroom, could be, you know what? I can't sell this particular model at this price, but we've got this one that was the showroom model that's had about, say, 100 miles on it as well, but we can give it to you at that price. Would that work for you? Can you see what I mean? So that person suddenly realized that they can get exactly what they want with a big discount, for example, but they can get something very similar. So again, that means the discussion is still alive. The negotiation is still alive. So the best time to ask for the best time to ask for concession, to give a concession is when you get asked for one.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
And the other thing as well is that I use this term here called people tend to drop their pants when they get asked for concession. And
What do you
even
mean by that?
what if I drop the pants is like, for example, they say, well, I want 100,000 for this. And if parties say, nah, it's too much. Will you do for 80,000? And then they say, okay, they'll say that. So what I'm saying is sometimes the moment somebody pushes back on their price, they drop their pants, just like that. They just surrender, they just give up basically, right? And that is how a lot of businesses and companies are losing a lot of money. I'll give you an example. Every single one of my clients that have attended my negotiation programs have always been asked this question. I mean, I've also asked this question. I said, in a particular sales situation, you're not there, you're the decision maker, but all your sales people out there, what's the maximum discount they can give before coming back to you for additional consultation? I usually give my salespeople 20% to negotiate with a particular client. Right, I tell them, and if you look at 90% of the done deals, how many percent of those done deals are done with a 20% discount given off? And they say, yeah, about 90% or more. So what's happening here? So what's happening here is the salespeople, in order to get that sale, are dropping their pants. They're giving everything they're empowered to do up to that point, so as to get that deal here. Now, what if through negotiations they could reduce it to none, or 5%, or even less than 10%? Imagine a huge amount of improvement it does to the bottom line, right? So here are some things that they can do so as not to be perceived as dropping their pants. One is that concessions should always be given in a small way, slowly, and progressively smaller. I'll give you an example. If, let's say, you want to buy, let's say, for example, you're selling something, and you're selling it for, say, 100 bananas. The buyer says, well, can you do a better price? And you say, how about 90? The seller says, nah, still too much. And then you say, what about 80? Seller says, nah, that's still too much. And you say, how about 70? Now, let me ask you this. What is going on in the buyer's mind?
Buyers, he would like to drive the price as low as possible.
Yeah, now looking at how you've been treating it in 100, 90, 80, 70, does he know what your bottom line is?
No.
He doesn't, because the way you've been dropping your pants in that way means that you can even go down as 50, right? So the right way you would do something like this, if let's say if you did want to give some concessions, would be around the lines of, well, 100's too much. I said, okay, what about 97? And he said, oh, that's not a very big discount. All right, how about, let's see now, I think I can do it for you for about 95 and a half. It's still a bit stiff, you say, All right, you know what? I think probably the best I can do is 95. Now, at this stage, what do you think is going on to the buyer's mind?
You do not have too much room to go further down.
Yes, because I'm giving the concessions slowly, small concessions, and then progressively smaller, which creates a psychological effect that, I don't think this person can go much lower now. Now, as a seller, you might be willing to go as low as 90, but suddenly you make the sale as 95. So there you just saved 5 bananas. The currency is bananas. All right. So that's a classic way of concessions that people should be doing. And also, I think another key thing that's often forgotten when giving concessions is the asking part. Meaning that sometimes we don't ask the other party what's important to them. I think that's really, really important. Because before we start dropping our pants, as I mentioned, we should ask, well, what's important to this particular buyer? For example, people tend to give cash discounts, which I don't like. Because when you give away a cash discount, what you're doing is taking money out of your wallet and putting it into theirs. In fact, in my programs and workshops, that's what I do. I ask somebody to take out their wallet, and then I take out some money, I put it in my pocket, and you see the look on their faces there. I said, yeah, but that's exactly what you do when you give a cash discount up front. So when you mean by making concessions small, slowly, and progressively smaller, is that you make a small concession up front. And sometimes that small one could be small to you, but it's really important or big to them. Let me give you an example. If let's say you're selling something bulky like photocopier machines, how important it is to have a 1 or 2 year on-site service warranty. That means they send their repair people to your office or to your home and they fix it there. Important to you? Of course is it. Why? Because you don't want to be schlepping a 100 kilo machine into the back of your car and take it down to their warehouse or to the repair center, for example. But what's the real cost to you? The real cost to you is to coordinate the services of one repair team around, say, your country or your city or island to fix these machines as and when they malfunction. But what happens sometimes? Sometimes people, instead of focusing on offering something like that as a concession, you know, I tell you what, we won't give you a big cash discount. We'll give you a 2-year rather than a 6-month on-site warranty. That's worth a lot to me as a buyer of a photocopier, but to you, as I say, it's just your own managing your own costs. But what a lot of people tend to do is that they tend to give away something big initially, right? They tend to give away a cash discount, for example. So that's another classic way of effectively making concessions.
Yes, yes, indeed. So how about in some scenarios, we are giving concession and it seems we are not getting there. There's no agreement yet. I heard that somebody say that no deal sometimes is better than a bad deal. What do you think about that?
I agree. Because what tends to happen, again, another mistake some people make sometimes is that there's something in a negotiation we call ZOPA, which is ZOPA, which means Zone of Positive Agreement. So again, let's say you're selling something for 100 bananas, but you're willing to let it go for 80 bananas. So the price range between 80 bananas and your asking price of 100, that's what we call the zone of positive agreement. Because if you can negotiate something in that range, you have what we call a positive outcome for you. All right. But what tends to happen is this. Somebody says, oh, I love your whatever called gadget. How much are you selling for? You say 100 bananas, right? And the person, how about 75? And suddenly you get all excited and say, let's see now, can we do like maybe 78 bananas? And then suddenly you get sucked into and involved into a negotiation where actually you shouldn't be involved in this at all, because whatever outcome you get is a bad deal, and maybe it's because it's below your ZOPA, your zone of positive agreement. So this is where you get to what I mentioned earlier, the BATNA, right? Your best alternative to negotiate agreement, which could be walking away from the deal, or as you said, no deal. And again, the question is that, do you have what we call walk away power? So the power thing I mentioned earlier, that comes back into play again. Do you have the power to walk away? Do you have the power to wait out for the next customer? If you don't have the power, you need to liquidate all these stocks urgently. Guess what? Your power level starts to drop quite dramatically in that specific negotiation. Then you start having to adjust your ZOPA from maybe 80 down to maybe 70. Now, everything that I've said is completely acceptable as long as it's very clear as to why you're giving the discount, why you're making the concession, or why you are saying no to the deal. So the key thing about it is having clarity in negotiating. That's why it's so important for people like training in negotiation, because most people don't do this naturally.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is one of the big mistakes people sometimes make, that they so want to have an agreement that actually go below than what they have set in as the expectation. So on top of that, won't you mind maybe give us 1 or 2 more examples of common negotiation mistakes that people make? I know there are a lot of mistakes that are quite common, but just maybe 1 or 2 more examples.
Well, I mean, I mentioned one of the early things I mentioned is sometimes a mistake if you don't have it in mind. That's not having a BATNA, not having a best alternative negotiate agreement, all right? The other one too is basically if you use bad tactics. Bad tactics could involve, for example, not knowing your client well enough, or you use a tactic that's not particularly effective. For example, if you are selling something, one of the tactics a client who's buying can give is what we call the crunch. The crunch is the name we call this tactic, is where you're saying, okay, I've explained all this now, and the price of this is usually whatever, $1,000. The person looks at it and says, he looks at it and makes sense like, or something like that. It's like, that's like, oh, ouch, or something along that line. And the negative, the very instantaneous negative response from the buyer, sometimes it's so shocking to the seller that unless they've been trained, unless they're prepared for it, and sometimes that noise or the exclamation the buyer makes sometimes it's just pure tactic. And it's called the crunch. The crunch can actually be emotionally quite crushing on somebody who's not trained or not used to accepting it. And sometimes when people are given the crunch, they backpedal very, very quickly on their price. And then suddenly they put themselves in a they're caught off balance and they may make a concession there and then, for example. Another classic mistake, especially on the phone, right? We're somewhere in a busy place, we're walking around and the phone rings and people start talking to us. And then suddenly, for some reason during a conversation, the question of price comes up. And sometimes because we're not sitting behind the desk and we're not calm about that yet, we suddenly mention a price. And later on, as we are getting back to the office, we realize, oh, I didn't realize X or Y or Z or something. And oh, I shouldn't have mentioned that price, or it was an older price kind of thing. But you've done it and they accepted it. There's some kind of verbal agreement there. It makes it very difficult and awkward for you to want to back out of it. So one of the classic mistakes is negotiate over the phone when you're not prepared. So the best thing you can do in that situation is after some preliminary chat with the client, say that, you know what, John or Jill, I'm not in a very comfortable position right now. Can I call you back in 20 minutes?
Right.
Right. So that's a classic mistake to make, especially when negotiating over the telephone.
Yes, definitely. Get prepared always.
And oh yes, here's a classic mistake people often make, and I see it happening all the time. And it's called being the first one to split in the middle. Let's say, right, your price is say 1,000, and suddenly say, yeah, I only have, I think I only want to spend 800. And then you, as a seller, suddenly say, how about we split the difference? So I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong in splitting the difference, but don't be the first one to split the difference. You know why, Priscilla?
They may actually are willing to pay higher.
Yes, that's one. And here's another thing, right? Let's say you're selling something for 1,000 and they are 800, for example. What happens if you are the first one to agree to offer to split the middle? 900. What happens? You have come down from 1,000, your asking price, to 900. But you know where they are? They're still 800. They haven't committed yet. So suddenly, once that happens, emotionally, you've conceded $100. You've gone down from 1,000 to 900. They're still 800. So that gives them a position to say, okay, I'll meet in the middle sometimes. Or you know what? I'm still 800. What about 850? Now, when that happens, suddenly you're kind of caught because now you've created a downward spiral for your price or something like that. I'm not saying I can still refuse 850, but I'm saying that that it creates this a different anchoring of the price in that sense. So what I often recommend to people is to use this tactic. And if you're listening out there, listen for this almost word for word. Thing to say sometimes is this. You know what, Priscilla? We are so close to closing this deal. So I mentioned that we are on together, right? We are so close to closing this deal. What can we do to make this happen? And you know what tends to happen? The other side says, how about we meet in the middle? So they go from 800 to 900. And guess what? You are still at 1,000. Now you're in a position with your relative power where you can say, well, what about 975? Oops. Now the positions have been reversed. Can you see what happens? So I'm not saying that never do a deal where you split the difference, but don't be the first person to offer to split the difference. Because the other party is almost likely to have some propensity to pay a little bit more.
Definitely. There's so much to learn. I mean, negotiation is what we should be compulsory in the school.
Yes, that's one thing they teach very badly even at universities. And you rarely get formal training when you go out in the workplace. But you think about this, right? Everyone thinks they can get more money by getting more sales. True to an extent, getting more research and development to get a new product. True to some extent, getting an existing product and slapping on more features and other benefits to it. Sometimes true here. But here's one thing you can avoid, because all those three things cost money, time, and effort. But if you can negotiate what you have on the table, the existing stuff on the table more effectively, you can make 1, 5, 10, 20, 30% more than when you first came into the picture. And I'll give you a story that happened about some years ago. We were negotiating a team development program with a multinational. And I had an internal person who liked my staff, but it turns out he was just an influencer. So we get to start talking about it and say, you know what, Dave, we need to have you there to give a motivational session as well. But you know that the team building will probably happen without me being there. But you've got to be there, he said, but I can't do it for 5,000. I said, who else is involved in this decision? Remember earlier I talked about context and who makes the decision? It's actually the chief financial officer. Is he in the office? He said, yeah, it's just over there. He said, so we walk over there and we sit down for 10 minutes. And the chief financial officer said, David, we really love to have you there so that you can do the session, and then you can also maybe co-facilitate the team building session. So you know what? I can do that, but a bit a different fee point. And he said, how much? And I gave a fee point, and it was 3 times the number that we were originally discussing. So let's say we're talking about 10,000, now we're talking about something close to $30,000. And after about 10 minutes, I walked out and we had sealed that deal for 3 times the deal that we were talking about when I walked into the office. So can you see, nothing changed. I didn't offer a substantially different program. Okay, yeah, I was there, I was doing my motivational session, but the team building remained the same. But so I'm just saying that for a lot of people, if you can just elevate your negotiating ability through training or just reading out or practicing, there's so much more you can deliver.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely need it and polish our skills. So I remember that when we are preparing for this chat today, one thing which is very interesting that you mentioned is there is actually differences between a male and female negotiators. So won't you mind let us know more about that?
Okay.
Sex do better usually.
And this can be quite controversial. That's why for the last 10 years of my study of negotiating, what happens between men and women, or rather what happens when women versus men try to negotiate, it's been a subset of my study of negotiating for the last 10 years. And the research has been changing over the years. So you really have to read really widely in all the clinical papers, and not something out of like some popular magazine you get off the news. You have to go and read the actual, validated studies to show what's happening here. So I'm going to summarize a couple of things for the women who are listening in here, right? There is no difference between men and women negotiating from an intrinsic perspective once they're trained. But you know that we don't live in a perfect world. Not everyone has the same amount of training, for example. So how are there differences? Here are some differences. And this is from some research going for the last 10 years. Number one, women tend to be penalized 3 times more than men if they're pushing a particular agenda, if they're negotiating in a fairly vigorous manner. And so this is something that's really unfair sometimes, but that's it. So there is what we call a social penalty that's disproportionately put on women when they negotiate. And here's the reason why. If you look at connected studies, you'll begin to appreciate why. The moment you introduce a woman into a group negotiation, the group then immediately assumes is that the women's presence is going to create a kind of a ameliorating, empathetic, gentler approach. Even if she's a tough negotiator in reality, the fact is that people have certain stereotypes. The moment you include a woman in a team, this is what tends to happen. There is this presumption or this assumption that the party that has a woman there will be a little bit more sympathetic, more emphatic towards the particular situation, not necessarily the case. So a couple of things for women to negotiate more effectively. So to reduce social penalty, what I highly recommend is that approach any negotiation, whether it's getting more time off from the boss, whether you're trying to negotiate one of your colleagues to produce something faster, or even you're sitting across the table negotiating with a third party, is number one, use your relational skills. That means don't focus on negotiation as something that's going to benefit you personally. So don't say something, for example, boss, I think I deserve a raise because, I've been working so hard compared to everyone else. That's sometimes seen by that next party as being self-serving. And women tend to be penalized unfairly much more than men. Number two, ask. The research from, by Linda Babcock at Carnegie Mellon has shown very often women don't even ask. I mean that in a salary negotiation, in a situation in a workplace, the reason why they don't get the outcomes they get sometimes is because they don't even think of asking, which is really, really unusual. Although there's been a very recent study based largely on Australians, over 1,000 Australians, that shows that actually that's becoming less and less an issue, at least for an Australian sample. So I don't know about other countries, but ask and think about the social penalty cost. The way to reduce it is to be relational. So going back to that situation here, so I'll say something like, my coach that's been coaching me thinks that based on what he's observed about my workplace outputs and outcomes is that he thinks I should be getting a higher salary. So suddenly you're using a third party's opinion to support your case. And that, believe it or not, actually reduces the social penalty cost. The third way to put it along the lines, for example, is that you can say things like, you know, I feel that I can contribute a lot to this team. So again, you're looking at your outputs benefiting a lot of people, not you personally. And thereby you then justify your salary raise by saying that because of that, I think I should, I should reward a little bit more because I'm contributing so much to the team. So the moment you put in the benefits to everyone because of your inputs or your outputs, the more likely you're going to get that raise. So hopefully this last 5 minutes is going to be worth a lot for you out there. The women out there, maybe you think of negotiating a better deal somewhere or even a better salary. These are some things to think about. Obviously, within the constraints of this Zoom session we're having here, we can't go into such great depth here, but it's definitely to think about when you're negotiating. So I would say that once trained, in a perfect world, there's no difference between men and women negotiating, but in reality, in an imperfect world, there are differences, and those things I mentioned is going to give you a distinct edge.
Indeed. And wow, David, you have been so generous with your time and the secrets and the tips for us. I know that for negotiation, you have full-day workshops that executives can actually join and learn more about the mistakes, how to avoid them, and the tactics that you can use to get better results in your negotiation, right?
Yes, and absolutely. And depending on the focus or the desired outcome, we can focus largely on tactics, and there are like 25 different ones for both buy side and sell side. Yeah, I know there's like the power, 10 different powers you can elevate. So there's a variety. I think the more tools that you have, the better worker that you can become, no matter where you are. And let's face it, there's some people who are just naturally good at negotiating, but in reality, most of us are not natural. We have to learn it. To learn. Yes. And once we learn it, we get better at it, we will begin to see the results coming for us. So like I said, instead of trying to spend a lot of effort and money doing R&D, massively increasing volume in something area like sales or marketing, one skill which you don't have to have any of this is just negotiate what you already have better with your customers.
Yeah, I totally agree. But today, thank you very much for your time and your generosity. We hope that we can have another session to learn more from you, maybe on negotiation or on the Everest lessons that you have, which a lot of our clients are so interested and appreciative of your experience that you share with them.
Yes, and I'll be very happy once you post this up, to answer any of those questions that people have. So you got it up on some social media. If any of you out there have got some specific negotiating type questions, fire away, and I'll try and give a short, pithy answer to your negotiation challenge. So until then, remember, right? You don't get what you deserve; you get what you negotiate.
Definitely. So thank you very much for today, for the time and the energy and the generosity. We talk very soon.
Thank you, Priscilla, and bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.